Welcome to the show, everyone. This is a stakeholder-centered coaching production where we believe everyone deserves a stakeholder-centered leader. Today's episode is another installment of the series Conversations with Coaches, where our top coaches share the behind-the-scenes unfolding of their careers. The goal of this series is to give you an intimate peek behind the curtain so you can see the messy ingredients that go into building a successful coaching career and the rewards that come at the end of the tunnel for those who are willing to put in the effort. I'm your host, Brandon Murgard, and if you'd like to ask a question or recommend a guest, send me an email to podcast@mgscc.net. My guest today is a Bay Area-based coach who holds an advanced certification with stakeholder-centered coaching, as well as a number of other tools. She's been coaching senior managers and team leaders across multiple industries for nearly a decade and a half. She's a personal friend and is a longtime frequent flyer with stakeholder-centered coaching and our founding team. Please welcome my guest, Kimberly Gonsalves. It's great to have you on the show, Kimberly.
Thank you so much, Brandon. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's been a little bit since we've worked on our last project together, hasn't it?
It has been. And that one was so much fun that when you invited me to this one, I wanted to say yes.
For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of seeing Kimberly's performance, she modeled the role of leader in many of our coaching lab videos. She was accompanied by Chris Coffey, who played the role of coach, and together they demonstrated some specific coaching techniques and how to apply them in various situations. This series is, of course, available to all coaches going through the certification program. But Kimberly, I'm very joyful to get to sit down with you together today to talk about how you've built this career for yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah. So first question, Kimberly, have you always wanted to be a coach?
No. If I go really far back, I wanted to be a veterinarian. But then once I actually got into the world of work, I found myself drawn to banking. My undergraduate background is a degree in economics, and I got interested in banking. I had some friends who were working at one of the large global banks, and that's where I landed straight out of undergrad. So that's how I got started. And
yeah, well, let's start there. What was it that drew you to economics? What drew you into finance?
I like to know how things work, and I like to understand context and put it together. And at one point, I will say I was never drawn toward doing the quantitative work that an economist might do. And so quickly decided I would try to use that basic framework and understanding and take it a different direction that offered more opportunity for interaction with other people rather than primarily working with data. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you went and studied this. Tell us about you mentioned you got right into a company after graduation. Tell us what that experience was like.
It was a lot of fun. I was living and working in San Francisco, working for a large global bank downtown. And I began with a group that was in the bank's corporate bank. So we were serving Fortune 500 customers, basically cross-selling short-term funding services. And so I had an opportunity to work on the trading floor, which was so much fun. I loved the chaos and the energy and the intensity of that. I often, as I look back on my career, think I was just so lucky because I worked with phenomenal people and had phenomenal leaders. So I was not one of those people who, got burned in corporate. But I really enjoyed that and began in that kind of marketing group, did some analysis, had the opportunity to, sit in the room with CFOs and listen to strategy and, how we could support them in short-term funding needs, and ended up moving onto the credit side as well as I as I continued to grow, I wanted to learn more and understand things at a deeper level. So I think looking back, what I noticed about that in that role in particular um, is really honing an analytical lens, but also understanding stakeholder groups, right? Because you need to be successful in business development. You need to satisfy credit criteria and manage risk. You need to be proactive in partnerships with other banks and professionals, right, to form these large loan packages. So it was a good experience. And I also really appreciated working for an international bank and having that experience of, I was one of two women in a branch of more than 100 Japanese
Wow.
men. And that was a really unique experience, both culturally and, from a gender perspective. So,
Mhm. How did that shape you? I mean, surely that had some type of impact working in a team with that type of gender and cultural ratio.
um, I think the way that it shaped me was it just made me even more curious. And that's something I've gotten spades naturally. Um, and so it gave me an appreciation for some of the elements and differences in communication style, in expectations about what teamwork means. So it was a really good learning experience, and sometimes felt, I don't know, I didn't feel lonely per se. There was another female colleague who was, great. And the men that I worked with were phenomenal. So I was part of a great team. I enjoyed learning. There was, lots of give and take and opportunities to challenge ourselves. So it was all good.
Well, it almost sounds to me like you've been preparing for this role in coaching for some time, working with great leaders, high-performing teams, chaos, energy, and intensity. Well, boy, that sure sounds like coaching, does it not?
Well, it sounds like what a lot of the people we work with are working in and living through, doesn't it?
Yes, it gives
Yeah.
that
I mean, as a
perspective.
coach, we are one step removed.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Hmm.
that was a lot of fun. I liked it. So coaching keeps me close to it.
Do you find that having that perspective and having that experience changes how you might approach a client relationship or how you approach a coaching engagement in general?
I think it heightens my sense of the importance of context. Um, really trying to get a sense for what is that leader's context? What do they operate in? What's the culture? What are the demands? What's happening in their industry, in the business? So, macro forces. Sure, I think it definitely shapes my approach.
And did you continue working in banks and in finance all the way up to the point that you transitioned towards becoming a coach?
No, I had an interesting transition. I worked in banking, and shortly after the birth of my first child, stepped out. And what I noticed as my children, got into school and became school age, I was actually drawn into coaching because I was having trouble with my son at that time. And I ended up hiring a coach to help me with parenting issues. And through that process and journey, just kind of fell in love with the profession. I didn't know that it existed as a profession, but a lot of that really resonated, and so that's what put me on my way. And I'd say that as I took that learning, I ended up becoming deeply drawn into the education and training space, and ended up transitioning into training work. So I was a trainer of trainers, working with educational leaders and mental health professionals, and really used a curriculum that was focused on leadership and developing respectful relationships. And so was privileged to do that work in the US, in China, in Spain, and it all really dovetails. kind of with my business background and became part of my personal philosophy of leadership and life and the way that I want to be in my own relationships.
Wow. So your first introduction to coaching purely as a profession came from working with a coach that helped with parenting styles and parenting techniques?
Yes. And, that's I think that's one of the hardest places to jump in, because for most of us, nothing is more dear to us than children and family. So that's a really unique space to work in. But
Oh, yeah.
you probably know this, and coaches who are listening too, when we're coaching leaders, it's rare that, at least for me in my work, it's rare that it's only about the business, right? Because who we are and the way we are in relationships shows up at work, it shows up at home. And so I think that's just an easy and obvious access point.
Mm-hmm. Out of curiosity, when you are doing a coaching engagement, do you also integrate parts of the home unit, whether that's a family or who the leader is being outside of their work environment?
That's a great question, Brandon. I do, and I kind of use my intuition as to when, but I will encourage leaders to include family members as stakeholders if it feels relevant. I think that can be really powerful. And I do believe it's true. Family are the toughest stakeholders you will ever have, right? Because they really know who we are, who we aspire to be, and how we fall short. But people who have the courage to do that, it's often tremendous, right? They see the ripple effect at work, at home. And for me, that's like the win-win.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are the key people who can benefit from our behavioral change at home. So let's get some quick stats for our listeners here. How many years have you been formally coaching?
I have been coaching since 2010, so quite,
Excellent.
more than a dozen years.
Yeah, and I know that you've worked with countless people. When you think about just those that you've worked one-on-one with in a coaching capacity over the years, how many would you say that is?
That's probably north of 120 or so.
And how many of those used some version of stakeholder-centered coaching or the tools therein?
Pure stakeholder-centered coaching, I'm approaching kind of 10, but I actually use elements of stakeholder-centered coaching now with anyone I coach, even if it's not the formal coaching methodology, because I just think they're so valuable.
Mm-hmm. Do any tools jump to mind when you think about the pieces that you've kind of selectively extracted and used outside of a formal stakeholder-centered coaching engagement?
Yes, I have to, say a big thank you and shout out to Marshall Goldsmith and Frank and Chris, who introduced me to that concept of feed forward. For me, that is, it's one of my biggest takeaways. And I think also, you've probably heard Frank Wagner say this as well, that in spite of a goal that a leader might choose to work on, the benefit and the impact to relationships is the most important. So I think I always have that in the back of my mind that, whether in coaching or out of coaching, being mindful of our key relationships and being disciplined about maintaining them, that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, let's start to establish a timeline. You've graduated, you've gone into industry. Along the path, you started working with a coach for parenting. What was the time gap between the time that you've been introduced to coaching as a profession to the time that you actually took action towards becoming a coach?
It's a good question. It was probably like 5 to 7 years. And by the time I got there, I was all in. Like, I'm going to get trained. I'm going to build skills in this. I'm going to bring this coaching into the other training work that I'd been doing. So when I got there, I went all in.
What did that transition look like for you as you moved from what you were doing before to actually becoming a coach?
It wasn't a huge transition, to be honest, because at that time my work was scoped to work for me in the time that I had available while raising a family. And so maybe like, many people, as you come to 2.0 and 3.0 of your life, that's where you have more space, more spaciousness for some of the things you've been wanting to do, but have, prioritized. So that's been my case.
Mm. I like this idea of 2.0, 3.0 you, and kind of an iterative version. And I'll flag how Chris described this to me that always stuck with me. He was such a golfer. He was describing to some of his buddies who are all mid 70s. He said, in the grand scheme of things, we're on the 17th hole. That's where our life is. We're in the 17th hole of the course. I thought that's so funny. Such a Chris way to put it.
Such a Chris way to put it. Yep.
Iteration. I'm all about that iteration. So it wasn't a full step change for you. It was maybe a smaller change going from what you were doing because you've suggested that somehow there's this tangible amount of available time between raising a family and having a full-time job to do more. How did you make that work for yourself? Because I need to learn this.
Yes, tangible. It has been my experience that there is a limited amount of time. I just did what I could and was clear about how much time I had. And as my time expanded, my ability to do more of what I wanted, more training, more work, more coaching, that just moved in lockstep with it. But for me, I was super clear about what my first priorities were and my first sense of responsibility. So I also had the luxury and the privilege of picking that up because, my partner was supporting our family. So I was in a position to do that work while raising children.
That's great. I mean, in our, many times in our community Q&A calls, it comes up, how do we actually bridge from what I'm doing now to being that full-time coach? And we always recommend wherever possible, make it a 0.1 version, not the full step change. If you can take whatever you have, fill that space with coaching as it grows, grow with you. But this is also a very entrepreneurial mindset. So let me ask you then, because a common theme that comes out is not just coaches being drawn into coaching, but also deeply interested in entrepreneurship and the act of running their own practice. What role did entrepreneurship play for you in building momentum towards becoming a full-time coach?
I actually come from a family of entrepreneurs. The last 3 generations, we've been family business owners and small business owners. So it's what I grew up with. And I think for me, in that sense, it was a natural progression, right? I saw that as another way of life besides being employed by a company. I think there are benefits to both. And for me, it was the obvious choice because I wanted flexibility. I wanted control over my schedule, and I wanted to do what I wanted to do, right? Which was coach. And I didn't want to do some other things, which would be part of a job description. So I had the luxury of getting to create, the role and the work that I wanted.
Let's talk about the less jazzy side of career development, specifically the fears and failures. But let's ease into this. What's the hardest part about being a coach?
I think for me, one of the hardest things is working in isolation at times, and it's something that over the years I have been successful in changing because that wasn't working for me, but it still is probably the biggest thing. I really like being with people in person, being part of a team. That's kind of my preferred way of working.
How do you manage that? Because I know that's something I certainly struggled with, but many of our coaches do as well.
Yeah. I just kept looking for people that I resonated with, and was really fortunate to find that in Chris and Frank. And I created my own team. In my very, first experience with the stakeholder centered training, I remember immediately a few of us got together, went out to dinner, and began to support each other. And we did skills practice after the training, and we just, we kind of built a network. So that's something that I'm good at, is finding people who can support me. And I'm a person who actually needs support. And it's taken me a long time to be able to say that without thinking that it should be different, right? Oh, I
Mhm.
should be able to do this alone. Maybe, but that's not who I am. So now I just know that I need to find smart people who are, ambitious and have a nice complement of skills and qualities to mine. That's my answer. It has taken time.
Well, it's a beautiful answer. It's a very pervasive problem, is the loneliness and isolation of working as a solopreneur, as many coaches are. But what you've said is, don't. What you've done well is, sounds like you negotiated with yourself, and rather than saying, okay, you have to figure out how to do it, you actually said, we don't have to. We need to adjust the environment so that I don't have to learn to do that. And you found that in some a cluster of coaches, you got together and you actually practiced. Is that a path that you would recommend to others to take as well?
Um, yes, I would say a path is, figure out what you need to be happy, do your best work. Like, how do you like to work? If you're introverted, I know people who are just thrilled to do everything over email, and um, they love to take that kind of more solo, behind the scenes approach. They don't love to be in the room with people. So just know who you are, find other people that you resonate with, who challenge you. Um, I think for some of us, actually most of us, unlearning is part of our learning, right? And what I might have tried before that worked in a different context might not work now. And it might have worked 5 years ago, but it doesn't work for me anymore. So I keep having to like invent things and keep trying new things and let go of what doesn't work.
That was a wisdom bomb right there, Kimberly. Could we say that one more time about unlearning? I want everyone to take this away, put it in your pocket. This is a take home for you. What'd you say about unlearning?
Unlearning. And this is something that I think Frank has talked about, sticks in my mind, but unlearning, like I learned something and it doesn't work in this context, or I learned something, but it's no longer the most important thing. So I have to be willing to let go of what doesn't work for the sake of finding something better.
Amazing. Amazing. If you're listening at home, take that away. Unlearning is part of learning. It is absolutely true. I think my first exposure to the concept of unlearning was in a research paper I was writing on. Part of the literature review talked about higher order learning theory and the various types of unlearning. So if you really want to treat yourself tonight, ladies and gentlemen, do some Google searching on unlearning, the ways that it works. It may be as important as learning itself. It certainly can help make some room. But okay, Kimberly, you mentioned in there, find ways to be happy. Let's talk about that. What do you do when you find yourself in a position of being unhappy?
First, I have to become aware of it. And for me, there's a difference between stewing in my unhappiness and then realizing, oh, I'm not happy and I want to do something about that. So mindfulness. But then, like for me, I know that if I change my perspective, that will help me. So number one thing I can do is get outside. And I live somewhere where it's easy to get outside, right? And I have the mobility to get outside. So I do that. Exercise is huge and a place that I'm trying to bring in even more. and not just exercise, but movement. I noticed that movement makes me feel good. And literally, I stop being stuck where I physically am. And at least I can take my body somewhere else. And that often will shift things. I also love like taking pictures. So perspective, if I go outside and get interested in nature, I'm going to shift my perspective pretty quickly. And then I can come back and refocus. What about you? Because I think this is something we're all struggling with, and I'm always looking for more tools. So what would you add there?
Sure. Well, Kimberly, this is your interview, but if you insist, I am just such a big evangelist for kettlebells, levered weights.
Seriously?
Kettlebells,
Okay.
clubs, maces, and sandbags are pretty much my staple. I spend at least 20 to 40 minutes with them every day. And sometimes that is actually doing kettlebell workouts, but other times it's throwing a bunch of weights into a wheelbarrow and just walking a few miles with my kids inside, because they love that. They get these little steering wheels and pretend like they're driving. It's a great full body movement. But yeah, I mean, exercise, sleep, and a good diet. Lots of water. I can't, you can't see this here, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 liquids on my desk. I have a large container of about 1 liter of tea. I have another caffeinated tea. I have a coffee. I have sparkling water, and I have flat water. And
Wow,
they'll
you
all
are
be.
really prepared.
Yes.
That's crazy.
It's a must, but these routines I think are really important. Are there any other routines that you have established to help you cope with the challenges and stresses of being a coach and an entrepreneur?
Yes, and I would say like they're applicable to anybody, whatever your life or your work is. And again, this has been an unlearning. I was very much raised with the philosophy of work first and play later. But what I'm coming to find out is I need some stuff for my soul to be in a good space. And so attending to first things first, I finally got that message, right? If I don't put my own oxygen mask on, I'm not going to be able to do it. So for me, taking time in the morning to ideally get outside. I love music. You and I have talked about music before. And when I make time for that, I am always reminded, like, why do I not do this more? Even if it's just listening to one song, right? It could be with my headbuds on, my earbuds. I don't know. I love a good cup of coffee, sitting outside if possible, and just giving myself time to ease into the day and kind of treat myself with a little bit of compassion before I just push the start button.
Well, just as a point of fun questioning, when you are listening to music, can you throw out a handful of songs or names, and actually think about the question, ladies and gentlemen, if you are listening on your commute, listening at the gym, watching on YouTube, Kimberly and I love sending music recommendations to each other, YouTube playlists, single songs, whatever it is. If you want to recommend a song to us, there is literally no style that we are not interested in. If there's any song, artist, or style you want to recommend, email it to podcast@mgscc.net. We are starved for new recommendations. Let us know what's in your playlist. So, Kimberly, what's in yours?
Yeah, thank you. I love that suggestion. I hope that you will share the playlist suggestions that you get. I've been going eclectic. I would say my taste is always eclectic. And I also tap my kids for suggestions because I don't spend enough time looking. So I've been going kind of into soul and R&B. So I've been listening to a band called Jungle. And they have a song I love called Lifting You, which is it's impossible for me to listen to it without dancing. When I'm hitting the gym these days, I'm listening to like old Led Zeppelin B-sides and just appreciating some driving guitar. I can't remember who introduced me to Leon Bridges, but I discovered his music a couple years ago and love his voice. So those are a few, but I'm always looking for more.
Yeah, I think just before we started, I sent you a recommendation of Pliny, who's an instrumental guitarist. If you're into that, Polyphia is by far one of the best. But I don't say this much. So if you come across this and you don't know it already, it might be a little bit jarring. But I'm really, really hot on death metal, speed metal, melodic metal. A lot of the stuff that comes out of the Nordic countries, things that are just fast and brutal. So my recent playlist I'm looking at now has some Omnium Gatherum, Arch Enemy, some other names I won't mention for for a number of reasons. But you and I have also exchanged, some early 90s or some mid 90s West Coast hip hop and a lot of that old jazzy New York boom bap kind of music. But I also have in here some Indian meditation music. I have some EDM and Dirt Monkey. That's who I'm going to send. That's why I intended to send you. I'm going to send you from a group called Dirt Monkey. Just a really interesting electric music.
Yours is much more eclectic than mine, and I confess that in recent years, because I've got a college-age daughter who loves pop,
there you go.
I have listened to a lot of Harry Styles.
Okay, there you go.
So
yeah.
I'm learning. I'm learning to appreciate some different styles of music.
They're all
keeping
good.
An open ear, an open mind is always important in life.
Well, I've learned a lot from you because I don't do any of the. I don't seek out popular music per se, but I do catch a lot of the mainstream. I've catched a number of mainstream artists from you who you have passed on from, one of your kids or from your own playlist. But I think that truthfully, we talk about routines and managing stress. I think having some really good playlists to suit your mood or artists to draw from can really have a positive impact on whatever is going on. Would you agree with that?
Totally. And it's actually something that I encourage leaders to do, right? Sometimes people need a theme song, or like life is hard. They're going through layoffs. It's tough out there. And so when I have a client who connects with music, I remind them, like, create a playlist for yourself that'll boost you or strengthen you or whatever it is you feel you need. Music is huge, right? Changing your state, man. Oh yeah, you can count on it.
Totally. And I'll up the ante here, Kimberly. If you are following along, here's a challenge and an invitation. So Kimberly, you're going to have to join me on this. So I'll need your green light before we officially do this. I would love to invite our audience for a challenge first to see if they can find some style of music, some genre, some orchestration that you or I look at and say, boy, I have never come across anything like this before. Ooh,
I love that.
How about that? Okay. So
what was tell me again that style you mentioned, the Nordic, like how did you explain that?
It's just melodic. It's called mellow death. It's such a lame term. It's melodic death metal. It's very melodic. It's typically very guitar driven, but a lot of the music that comes from that region, which would also fall under the black metal category, tends to have strong synth elements to it. And so you might have some, if you listen to someone like Children of Bodom, their early music, pre-2000s, they would have this almost call and response between the guitars and the keys. And it's different. I've always, since I was a little single digit age boy, loved metal. It's always been a part of me. I don't know why. So there you go.
Awesome. All right. Yeah. So challenge accepted.
That's the challenge.
That is a genre that Brandon and Kimberly have not heard of. And mostly I can tell you the challenge will be with Brandon because
It's a
You
team
have a
effort.
very strong musical background.
Yeah, I've got some Tuvan throat singing metal here. I've got some Scottish metal. I've got the old Viking storyline type of stuff. But there's no genre off the table. The only one that I haven't been more into, I've been into in the past, but not so much these days, is country Western kind of stuff. Mostly for the subject matter doesn't appeal. But the style and the instrumentation is great. So I digress. The other invitation is, if you have a playlist that you have tailored to your mood, this is my sad playlist, or this is the one that I listen to when I need good working background music, send us a link. Preferably, it's probably Spotify or YouTube, since for accessibility, but whatever it is, send us a link. We're curious.
Yeah.
Good. And include music in your routines. So Kimberly, making this transition has a huge amount of uncertainty that comes with it. And of course, that can produce fear. It can produce doubt. Let's take uncertainty as the prime focus. How did you address your ability to work in a highly uncertain field, such as entrepreneurship?
Honestly, that's just been a place of growth for me. I came out of banking that was very structured. And so needing to figure out structure, right? We all need structure, and having to recreate it for yourself takes a lot of work and effort and learning, trial and error. With respect to the uncertainty, I love some reframing on questions that I can ask to myself when I get, fearful. What's the best thing that can happen? It's easy to go toward the worst. And again, like referencing values, what's one step I can take in the direction of what I want? And usually what I want is something that I've identified that's important for reasons that are really deeply resonant. And so that always helps me. I feel that my values pull me toward action, even when I'm afraid. And I remind myself, like one of my, quotes that was Chris had that phenomenal signature line. And that's, be happy, learn as if you're going to live forever, live as if you're going to die forever, be happy now. And one of my old signature lines was, be creative, make a new mistake today, right? Rather than repeating the old one. So I remind myself that mistakes and failure is a natural part of learning. My brain knows that, but my central nervous system always freaks out, right? Like, oh, I don't want to do the wrong thing. But I just need to remind myself of that and surround myself with people who also know that and remind me and, cheer me on for taking risks, cheer me for the times when I fail and fall short, and ask me, what did you learn? What are you going to do with that? Right? I love our after action review for that reason, and always have, Chris's voice in my head. What did you set out to do? What did you actually do? What did you learn? What will you do going forward?
Yeah, it's a great tool. The video of you two doing that, I have to say I'm probably privileged to listen to that at least once every couple weeks, that particular role play that you two did. That's great. So you address uncertainty by increasing your confidence in your ability to fail and recover quickly, a better person. Is that a fair way to summarize that?
Yeah, because I have not figured out a way to, get rid of uncertainty. So I just try to increase my resilience and my ability to manage it and live with it and get stronger because of it. That makes me feel more in control. Like, okay, cool. Give me more uncertainty. I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you reduce the sting of fear is really what you're doing by, through that process. As we talk about dealing with failure, let's think, could you think of a significant failure that you made in your coaching career? Anything that comes to the top of your mind?
I'll say this. because I am teaching myself to always reframe failure, right, as learning. For sure, I have made mistakes. I have not had catastrophic failures in coaching. And I hope that that remains the case. But in one of my early stakeholder-centered engagements, I had a pretty tough go of it. I had a fabulous client who was courageous, who had the humility to ask for help. She was disciplined. What I didn't anticipate was that my sponsor, her CEO, might tack on a performance review into a stakeholder check-in session. And that really, that we as coaches aspire to help our leaders make those stakeholder check-ins safe for their folks and safe for themselves, because most people are not comfortable with the process initially. So that actually, took a little bit of work to get my client back on track, where she had, she kind of got a lot more than she bargained for in a check-in. And what was valuable for me about that learning was to not assume what somebody else might make up about the process, right? So now I'm always clear to say, and by the way, my suggestion is that you keep the stakeholder check-ins clean and simple. Do not attempt something like a performance review while you're in a stakeholder check-in. And if you're in an organization or personally have a history of running over time, make sure that you hold to that 5 to 10 minutes and let your people know, I'm structuring it this way intentionally. I want to respect your time. I'm going to follow this process every time. Here's what you can expect. So the learning was good, but it was uncomfortable, really uncomfortable for my client. They're always in the hot seat, not us.
So if I heard that correctly, you have a client whom you're coaching, and their manager during the stakeholder check-in tacked on the performance review to the leader that you are coaching. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Wow. What was it like receiving the message describing the situation from that leader? I have to imagine that was like just a complete facepalm moment.
Yes, that facepalm. Yes, that's exactly it. Right. It was tough, right? There's a lot of feelings that go with that. So, and it really made me have to kind of work hard to rebuild trust, because that was not what was supposed to happen. And I had not anticipated that. Mm-hmm. So,
what was running through your mind as you received that message? Like, were you thinking, oh my gosh, this is done for? Or were you thinking, okay, maybe we can salvage this?
I think I was just connected to how my client had experienced it, which was inappropriate, not what we agreed to be doing, and totally caught her by surprise. To her credit, she was able to hear all of that information, right? She kept it together and managed herself, and did so in a remarkable way. And when we got together and talked about it, it was tough. It was tough. I think that's a risk, right? That, coaching can be messy at times, and we as humans are messy. So that's part of what I really appreciate about our process and methodology is it's structured. So that's always kind of a path we're walking, right, is between flexibility and structure. But I feel like the structure is important for the safety of the process and the effectiveness. So with that experience now, I try to be more clear and give people who are very new to this framework a little more of a heads up, right? Like, let's think through what are some ways that would support you in doing this well, and what concerns do you have? And my leaders often have concerns, right? Some of them don't want to get sucked in with a stakeholder whom they perceive as long-winded, It's like, okay, cool. Let's talk about how you're going to manage that to make it successful. And I've had leaders with north of 14 stakeholders. So, being efficient with time is really important.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about rebuilding the trust between the stakeholder and the leader. How did you go about doing that?
I think what was important, what I felt was the right choice there was for me to really use that relationship that I had with the sponsor and just have an honest and direct conversation. I became aware that this is how a check-in happened. And I want to let you know, because you're sponsoring this process and you want success, that's not going to help us be successful. And so please, follow our process, keep the check-in just a check-in. And if you as a leader need to speak to someone on your team, have another meeting, a conversation about another subject, please schedule those separately from this. It helps keep it clean and positive for people.
And was that a difficult conversation to have, or was that fairly simple given the sponsor's perspective on the coaching process?
It was simple. It might have been difficult, but I had built some trust with that sponsor and relationship, and I had great respect for him as well. And so I think whenever I make a mistake or someone else does that I'm working with, I just try to come honestly and say, hey, there's something on my mind that I need to talk with you about. Is this a good time? Right. And I think, Jathan Janov is somebody in our circle who has some phenomenal tools. His no fear conversations, I think, are a really, really cool script, both within coaching and in life.
Absolutely. If you're wanting to find this resource, if you go to Google and you type in SHRM, SHRM, Jathan Janov, JNOVE, no fear confrontation, you'll probably find the article right on top. And the more I read of Jathan's publications, the more our organization and our culture starts to get firmed up, because we put these tools in. We can finally walk away and be like, okay, that area is taken care of. We don't have to worry about that problem anymore. Coming back to difficult conversations, how can you think of other difficult conversations you've had to have as a coach?
Oh, yes. Would you like to hear more about them?
Given your enthusiasm with the answer, I'm going to say yes. Please do.
I think for me, one of the toughest, it's rare, but I find that it can kind of hook me. So I have to be a little careful in my own preparation. And that's someone who is enthusiastic, but then does not put the time in and is inconsistent. And I always have Chris Coffey's words in my mind, like, need to go at that directly and to take it seriously. And so, yes, those are always, I find those to be a little bit of a difficult conversation, and they're important to not dodge.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I can't remember who said it, but that your success is directly proportionate to the number of uncomfortable conversations you're willing to have. And I do see that very true, especially in coaching. But I'm recalling the demonstration video, the coaching lab video, that one of them that you did with Chris, where he really does. I mean, and these were relatively unscripted. You didn't know he was going to go this direction, but the scenario was that you as the leader had a tough conversation, I think in a board meeting. Everyone was given the directive to cut your workforce by something like 10%, your bottom 10%, something like this. And I remember your placement, your modeling as the leader was like, hey, my bottom 10% affects business performance more than your top 10%. And I was like, man, that's just, how do you deal with this as a coach? And his question, his directive to you was, you need to apologize. You had an uncomfortable conversation. You need to go apologize. Well, they were the one who were in the wrong. It's not my fault. And Chris kind of paused, got that little smile that he usually gets and says, are you
That is
likely
the
to gain or
smile.
lose respect if you make that apology? It's like, oh, yes, thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for the suggestion. It's
Yeah.
tough.
And I think that's, for those who knew Chris or were not lucky enough to know him, I think what he brought to those difficult conversations was a real respect and a willingness to push his client to be uncomfortable for the sake of their success, right? And so, like you said, I do remember him always leaning in with just an incredible twinkle in his eye and that certain tilt of his head, right? And then the question would come. And I would say I credit Chris Coffey additionally with making a distinction for me, an important distinction, right? As coaches, we are trained to use powerful questions as one of our standard tools. And they typically begin with what or how, they're open-ended. But from Chris, I learned the power of a closed question. I'm getting the sense, Brandon, that you're not really committed to this process. Is that accurate?
Ooh.
And it's like he could do that so well. So I think there's room for that. There's room for clarity as long as that's done with respect. And I think Jathan does a great job of modeling that in his work and tools as well. You might consider throwing those into the show notes, throw the link in for the Society of Human Resource Managers, but there's some great stuff there.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. We'll see whatever we can include in the show notes, which would include the no fear confrontation and maybe a handful of other, the 331 or 311, 331 approach that he's got. Yeah, there's some real richness there, both for coaches as well as for managers and anyone who's leading people, whether they're on payroll, they're volunteers, whether there's a 3-decade age gap between you, maybe you're a teacher teaching little kids, or maybe you're fresh out of college working with very senior individuals. It's really going to be powerful. So we'll see what we can include in the show notes. Last question on the topic of failure, Kimberly, it's an observational one. You know a lot of coaches. You have led a lot of coaches in many of the workshops. What is a mistake that you see many coaches making, maybe just more often than probably is reasonable?
You want to narrow that at all?
If you could get all the world's leadership coaches into one room and you have 30 seconds to make a meaningful message to kind of improve something a mistake everyone's making, a failure everyone's experiencing, what line might you feed to that group so that let's say the proverbial ocean raises all the boats?
That's such a good question, Brandon. And a challenging one.
Sure. Have a think about it. And again, if you're at home listening, feel free to chime in. What we do, just so you guys are aware, and Kimberly, so you have a little bit of time to think, when you send these things to us, we use this to understand what topics need to be broached. We take great answers and publish them and give shout outs on our LinkedIn and in my personal LinkedIn. So we want to engage. The purpose of these dialogues is to engage you as listeners. So if there is a crisp 30-second snippet, send it as a video, send it as a text, tag me on LinkedIn and post it up. However you get it to me, just let me know what message would you give to people. So Kimberly, what is something that might make your short list of a message to share with all the world's leadership coaches in one place?
Listen more deeply. Coach the person, not the problem.
Whoa. That wasn't even 30 seconds. Can you say that one more time?
Listen deeply. Coach the person, not the problem.
Wow. Tell me a little bit about what that means, coaching the person, not the problem.
My experience is that, because we all have subject matter expertise, and like Marshall says, in terms of, feed forward, we like to give advice, but often most of the time, my client knows what they need. And so if I can focus on connecting deeply with them as a person and really, coaching them rather than trying to solve their problem or consult, those are two different skills, right? Coaching, consulting. And yeah, that would be my advice.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And I have to say, Kimberly, I'm shamefully a bit guilty of falling into one of the wrong categories you've just described more often than I'm particularly proud of. But I think we all do, right? I don't think any of us are. I think very few of us are special in our failures. I think more often than not, we're united by our failures rather than separated. But,
Brandon, you're just making me think of something else there.
Lay it on me.
As you're speaking, like united in our failures. I think what resonates with me, having been coached as well, is the difference between someone who thinks they know what I should do, and I can sort of sense that on the other side, and the difference in someone who really assumes that I've got this and I have the answers and I'm going to find my way. So it feels,
Yeah.
Anyway,
what does that look like?
Important.
Or what could you watch for in a coaching conversation that you could pinpoint and say, oh, this person definitely is genuinely curious about what the options are versus, hey, I know what you need to do and I just need to get you to think that it's your idea that you've come up with. How do you see that?
Well, Brandon, if I have to watch myself for it, right, which I do have to watch for it, is like first when I start to think I know, that's always a dangerous warning sign. And when we as coaches ask leading questions. So I think right with everything, it's awareness and just being aware of what our own habits are and making those visible, right? That's another thing that Chris and Frank do beautifully. How many times have you been in a conversation or training with them and they might say, are you aware, Brandon, that in the last 5 minutes, you've used the word but 17 times? Right? It's like calling ourselves out and becoming really good at observing behavior.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to give an answer for that question on the record, but you can assume it's a non-zero number. How's that?
Yeah, agreed. I will say mine is north of 6, and it's horrifying every time that someone points it out to me. It's like, no, thank you.
Yep. Just for fun, sometime try sharing that with them. Just literally, no jokes. If you or anyone else has a chance to be with one of the, just any one of the greats in this industry, try giving some tough feedback to see how they'll respond. And I'll give an example that really blew my mind. I won't name names because I don't want anyone to feel embarrassed, but I was with a leader. And this must have been, I was with a leader. We were driving. I was in the passenger seat and the person driving was going too fast subjectively from the perspective of law enforcement and the speed limits, whatever. They were definitely speeding. I was uncomfortable. I was also very junior to this individual. And we were overseas working on a very critical project. So I didn't want to ruffle any feathers. I'm just kind of biting my lip, looking around, making sure we're good, everything's safe. And in the distance, I see a red light. Well, we were filming with Marshall, and one of the topics was his story on, look out, there's a red light. And do you say thank you? Or do you say, of course I can see the red light. You think I can't see this? Why are you telling me that? So I just kept waiting, and then the red light was coming, and the red light was coming. And I said, look out, there's a red light. And I looked over, expecting to see cartoonish fumes coming out of the ears and nose. And they looked back and thank you. And just kind of sat there holding the steering wheel. And I thought, oh my God, these guys that really are, these individuals that are the kings in the industry, they, from my experience, largely practice what they preach, especially when it comes to that tough feedback. So I've been less graceful than that, I'll admit. But if you have
Ditto.
a chance to give that back to Frank or Marshall or any of these guys, many of these people, definitely take that opportunity. They will appreciate it too, which is what's also enjoyable. Good. Well, as
it's a fun story. Sure. I often get leaders who they are already successful, they are highly respected, and they want to tweak something to become more effective. Oftentimes it's in the relational realm. That's kind of one of my areas of subject matter expertise. So communication styles. I'm frequently surprised at how little training is done for managers, right? And we know that people are often chosen to be in leadership positions because they were excellent, standout individual contributors. And like you just spoke to it a moment ago, saying modeling, right? What we need as humans are positive examples of the behaviors we want to see. And so for a leader who may be working in a context where that is more difficult to find, particularly in current climates, right? Tough economy, lots of stress and layoffs, that can be challenging. But I think that's, the modeling is really important. And sometimes as coaches, we can provide some of the modeling, right? That's part of what we do. We reflect and mirror, and we also model. And so I'd say the people that I tend to work with are people who want to become even more successful. And they're also willing, to concede that there's something they can learn, and they're hungry for it, right? My favorite clients they're really hungry for it. They're open, and they are gracious. They are the people who, when they're behind the steering wheel and you call them on something, will say, thank you, right? Or better yet, not rolling the eyes, but we all have an appreciation for the fact that there's real frustration, right? Like nobody wears the calm face all the time. So,
if I'm a leader listening to this interview and I'm thinking, Kimberly really might be the right coach for me, what I would ask myself is, am I hungry to learn? Am I going to be generous with my focus and my commitment to doing this? And then also a key piece I want to clarify is this needs to be a performance incentive. This is not you are on the way out of the organization. This is not remedial. You've got a problem. This is, I'm a high performer. I'm an excellent manager. I happen to have a bottleneck that's going to keep me from going to the next level. And that's kind of a 3-question framework I could ask myself to determine whether Kimberly is the right fit. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that is a fair characterization. And I think another important question that some of the best leaders I've worked with are asking themselves is, what am I not giving my team that they need from me? Mm-hmm. Right? Sometimes they don't know how. Sometimes it's not part of their experience that's made them successful to this point, right? We all have to kind of get rid of that. But that's another important one. Mm-hmm. Who do I need to be in order for my team to function the way we need to?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned subject matter expertise, and I think this is an important topic because stakeholder-centered coaching is a process. It's not a methodology. It's not adaptive. It is plug and play, cut and paste. It's a system that no matter what your inputs are, as long as you as a leader have courage, humility, and discipline, and a handful of stakeholders that are willing to support the process, you're going to get better. And we see that empirically grounded as well. What we encourage coaches to do as a differentiating factor is to bring their own subject matter expertise, so that if you hire Brandon as a coach, you're going to get the same results as you would if you hire Kimberly. But if you hire Kimberly, you're going to have this whole other section of subject matter expertise. What domain of expertise do you own, or what niche do you own in terms of your service offering to clients?
I would say it's primarily in the area of communication and relationship building. Part of my, tagline, if you will, is stronger relationships, better results. And I'm really, like, for me, as I've shared with you a bit in that story, respectful relationships are important to me personally. So that's aligned with my experience, with my life experience, and challenges that I've had, right? Like, trust me, I don't get this respect stuff right all the time. But that's the area that I like to play in. And that's because I've done a lot of work in those areas. So I have a lot of learning to share.
Mm-hmm. I like to ask highlights and lowlights. This is a valuable question, whether you just came back from vacation or you're doing an interview. Thinking about your career, what are some of the highlights that come to mind? Or being a coach, what are the highlights?
I have to say, like, career-wise, a little broader than coaching. One of my highlights was definitely working in Spain. I was working with a group of about 30 people in a training, and did it all in Spanish. And Spanish is my second language. So I had a partner who was bilingual and supported me, but boy, that took a lot of courage and humility to do that. But it was a blast. It was so much fun. So I always really feel proud of myself for taking a risk. And it was successful. Yeah, it was fun.
Would you do that again if given the opportunity?
Yeah, I would. I would also need to prepare, right? And discipline comes in there, but absolutely. I think life is the most fun when you can combine things, maybe stacking. You might have heard of habit stacking, right? But if I can do work I love with people I enjoy in a place that is fun, for me, that's a lot of fun. And there's learning on top of it. So.
Okay. So you have stakeholder-centered coaching as a process. So you know that if you're working with a client, they're going to get better. You've got this domain expertise in communications and relationship building. You have the added benefit of being a lover of music and someone who also has some very happy, healthy routines that you can share. What other kind of skills, tools, or perspectives sit in your peripherals that also make you an effective coach?
One of the things that I'm constantly educating myself about is I put it in the camp of positive psychology, right? You spoke to it earlier: eating, moving, sleeping. It's my belief, and the research bears it out. If we do not have those fundamentals firmly established, we cannot function at our best. So that's something that I talk about with every leader. How much do you sleep, right? When was the last time that you ate? Right? Some people get angry, and that does not help their performance. So I would say some of those, tools and practices around really monitoring just our own physiology are very important. Also, mindfulness. That's something that I've studied and continue to practice with on my own. And I think that's key, right? We have to first be aware of something and desire change before we can do it. But if we are not even mindful of how we're behaving or what our impact is or how we're feeling, that's a very tough place to move forward from.
Do you have any, let's say, prerequisites to work with you as a coach? And a specific example I'll draw on is I once had a coach who said, I don't work with anyone who doesn't have a subscription to this particular website that has concrete, let's say, hard skills for managers. Because they essentially said, I can help you be a leader, but I can't help you be a manager. So you need to sort out your house on a managerial level before I can help you with a coach at a leadership level. do you have any requisites such as you need to be sleeping 8 hours a night, or you need to have, these other areas of your life under control? What does that look like for you?
I guess I've not had a client yet that is so far out of bounds on any of those that I felt that I needed to say, I'm sorry, I don't think we can work together. I have at times through the course of coaching felt that a client might benefit from therapy. And this is not within the context of stakeholder-centered coaching that this became apparent, but in other professional coaching that I've done, and that sometimes can be a little rough. But if somebody's consistently bringing the past, or they seem to be depressed, I think those mental health cases and symptoms are things just to be aware of. It's not that coaching cannot coexist, but I want people to get the support they need, and I'm not qualified to deliver the mental health support. So I always ask my organizational clients, what do you have available to you in terms of your EAP? What other support and resources can you tap? And I haven't had it, be a problem where it interferes. I've only had one person who sort of faded away after I suggested that it sounded like therapy might be more the thing. So
yeah. Well, that's a very important distinction to make as a coach, right? To be able to understand where your domain expertise ends and someone else's begins. I'd hate to misquote, but to the best of my knowledge, I recall Marshall saying in a presentation something to the effect of psychology is good for understanding the past and coaching is good for affecting the future. And so one of the kind of lines that I can see him draw is, as people talk about these past hurts and they're this and that, it's like, do you want to do something about that? If yes, like, I can help you. If the answer is no, or I just want to grumble, I can listen. But if you need to understand that, that's not something I can help you with. So, here's some good, I think it speaks to the need to have a good referral network as well as a coach, to have whatever that fringe as an outside of your domain, who you can pass over to. But on the topic of routines, you've mentioned you encourage people to have better balance in different areas. Do you find that your clients generally have changes in their own habits, routines, or balance as a result of working with you?
It depends on, the focus of the engagement, and every client is different. But I think if there's a need and people are open to it, I think that's one of the things that we know is a ripple effect from coaching, that if we begin to make progress in one area, it can translate to other parts of life. So, I sometimes see people doing that. One of the questions that I like to ask people is, what are you tolerating and why?
Oh, wow.
And that's often like self-reflective about more than my work, but it's my life, right? But it could have a work response as well. So,
wow. I would love to know, we can talk more about this offline sometime, what kind of responses you get from that. Can you name one or two offhand that you've ultimately been able to create leverage through the coaching with?
Usually those are in the area of places where people are not living up to their own standards or their own commitments to themselves. And they just need to take a hard look at the impact that's having. I think part of what is really unique about coaching is, I think of it as providing a space where learning and growth can happen. And an old mentor said to me, growth happens in an environment of encouragement. And so I think that's part of what I strive to bring to my coaching, is to allow it to be okay for people to not have it all together, because there's a lot of pressure to appear. But all of us, have places that are wobbly and that we're working on. So just making it normal, like we talked about, right? Gaps. That's a normal part of learning and upward progression. Of course, we have gaps in areas where we have never done the thing before.
Well, we're headed into the fourth quarter now, and I want to give you the chance to speak directly to some key listener demographics. So what I'd like to do is I'll take on the role of some audience segments and ask you for advice, or what kind of advice you would share with someone who's facing my specific set of challenges. And I'll start with aspiring coaches. So, say that I'm a listener. I have heard your discussion. I haven't started my coaching career, but I just hired a coach to help me with parenting, and I'm introduced to the profession. I'm very interested in making this my career path. What should I be thinking about from your perspective? What should I be thinking about before I make that plunge into being a coach?
It's a great question. Big picture, think about what your needs are and what your time is available, what resources you have to support you on this journey. Get very clear about how much runway you need before you need to earn an income of X in order to support your lifestyle. And I always encourage people to learn and practice on the side and do what you love doing, but be responsible fiscally. As a former banker, I think that's part of what helps me sleep at night, is knowing that I have a plan, and just the wish and the prayer, or some of these people who say to new coaches, the measure of your commitment is that you walk away from your full-time gig and you do the solo coaching practice. I think that's terrible advice. But each person has to figure it out, for themselves. So know yourself, know your needs, be real, do that reality testing with smart people you respect, get some input, test your ideas, validate.
Could I ask, who did you do that with, Kimberly? At your outset, who was your sounding board, or who was the person who really helped guide you?
I tapped a number of people, and probably like you, I have different friends and mentors for different kinds of things. So I felt pretty comfortable understanding what I needed to bring in. So for me, a lot of the learning and framing was more around process and structure and building habits, because I love the idea, but it takes real daily work and effort to make this happen. And you don't always succeed.
Oh, that's a scary bit of advice, isn't it? It might not work.
Well, I don't always succeed. Maybe somebody else does, but I don't always. So that's part of it too. Is get used to being uncomfortable.
I like that.
And figure out if you like that. Right. And if you don't, then don't do it, or do it as a hobby.
Tell me more about that. How might someone go about deciding whether they like being discomfort? By definition is uncomfortable. So how could someone identify whether they like the discomfort or not?
It's a good question. I guess, put your, in coaching, as Chris Coffey would say, use it within 24 hours, do it. So if you see yourself shrinking back again and again, okay, you can sort of have some self-compassion and notice that's where you are, that's your reaction, but also be, practical. If you can't get past discomfort, this may not be the path for you, right? You can go online and search, what are the qualities of successful entrepreneurs? And if you see that your profile and your appetite for risk is vastly different, that might give you cause. Maybe you want to find another way to pursue this that's, more suited to your needs and your style. I think there's no one right way is the answer.
Okay, well, if I'm an organization and, I've got some key leaders that are driving business performance, but, they just have those nagging behaviors that I wish we could change. I believe coaching might be a way to address these, but I'm not really sure where to start or what to look at. Would you recommend a book, a person, a series, a course, a website? How could I find out more about coaching and whether or not it would be right for my leaders in my situation?
I think one of the most effective direct ways to do that is for organizations to have a conversation with someone who does what they need, right? If you came to me and you were an organization and you shared, I have leaders, they have some areas that need work, I'd have a conversation with you on what kind of outcomes are you looking for, right? What's your time frame? I'd want to help you understand how my process works, and maybe it's a fit for your culture and maybe it's not. I might ask you, how good are you with feedback? What is your own level of comfort with difficult conversations? Do you have a leadership competency framework? What are you working from? Right? And kind of have a conversation about, where are you? Where do you need to get to go? How can I help you? This is a process, stakeholder-centered coaching. I think for me, one of the most important things as a former banker, I really value the fact that 95% of leaders who follow this process with fidelity experience perceived change, perceptible change in their leadership effectiveness as measured by stakeholders. That is as close to a formula for success as you can get. Right. So I can assure you as an organization that the process is proven. It's well researched over 250,000 people around the world, nonprofits, for-profits, different sectors, NGOs. The process works. What I can't guarantee is whether your leaders will, have the courage, humility, and discipline to run with it, and how that might actually work for you. But my aim is to partner with you to be successful.
Well, something that's really fascinating, Kimberly, and I think that we haven't drawn enough attention to this, is that leadership as a contact sport research that you're referencing, where there was 250,000 people and they were taught the process, and 95% of those who consistently followed up with their stakeholders got measurably better by asking the stakeholders, how much change have you seen in the leader's behavior on a -3 to +3 in this particular behavior? What we're not talking about, though, is that 95% that got better, none of them had coaches. None of the leaders in this, or I should say, it was not a matter of a control group of those who had coaches and those who didn't. None of these people had any systematic coaching during that time from the research perspective. So it's actually 95% of people who self-implement and consistently follow up get better. What I've seen on the research side of things is, which should be taken with a grain of salt, because this is heavily biased and it's pulling from our own coaches. It's pulling from the clients with whom, it's from the clients that are working with our coaches. 100% of them have improvement at 6 months, 9 months, and 12 months measured by stakeholders. And so this would be something certainly that you could offer to the organization at the same time. Good. How about we have had circumstances where leaders have a coach and they hear about the systematic approach that we take, or they hear about tools, stakeholder-centered coaching or otherwise, on the podcast, and they say, I am just not quite so confident in my coach as I'd like to be. I'm not sure how to approach the conversation, or even if it should be a conversation. What's your view?
I appreciate the question. That's something that I talk about with my leaders and coachees on the front end, because I think it is incumbent on me as a coach to model what I'm asking them to do. So part of my intake process is, will you, Brandon, if we're going to work together, will you agree that if there's a problem with me, that you're willing to share it with me so we can talk about it? And if I can rectify it, I will, right? Part of my job is to flex to meet your needs. This is about you. If I can't, or if it becomes clear that I'm not the coach for you, for me, that's part of my personal integrity to say so. But if you have the feeling that I'm not working and I'm not changing, you should get another coach. Like, don't, it's not you. Follow your gut, do what you need to do, but don't be afraid to have the tough conversations.
Wow. So you have that arrangement with your clients. If I'm underperforming or uncomfortable or whatever, give me that feedback.
Absolutely, because that's what I'm asking them to do with their stakeholders, right? So in this process, I think it's doubly important. But in any coaching engagement that I am, serving clients in, I'm asking for feedback and I'm asking for feed forward, because that person is the ultimate judge of whether or not they're getting value.
Oh, yes. That's a key takeaway for those of you listening. Set that up with your clients early on. Make sure that you have that channel of feedback, feed forward open. Okay, here's another one. If I came to you as a coach and I said, Kimberly, I think my coaching skills are up to par. I need to work on myself as a service provider. What qualities or characteristics, personality traits should I focus on to develop myself as a coach?
So apart from your coaching skills, I think a huge one is relationship building and being willing to extend the introduction, be the first one to start a conversation. Obviously, building relationships and successful repeat relationships with clients is the easiest way to grow your practice. Apart from that, I would say take a hard look at what your strengths really are, because for any of us to be working outside of our strength zone consistently is going to lead to feeling burned out and tired and grumpy. So for me, I'm not strong with process, and it's something I aspire to, but I frequently tap other coaches or even friends for suggestions. How can I do this better? Sometimes I hire stuff out that I'm not good at. It doesn't make sense for me. I could beat my head against the wall. It'll take me 3 times as long to do it. And that's a quick way to, feeling ineffective. So know what you're good at, you've got to be willing to invest, right, in yourself to learn and grow and keep building skills, but also in the support that your business needs, because it's very hard to do it all.
Good. I'm going to queue up one more question. I'm sorry?
What would you add? Because what would you add there, Brandon? Because I know, unlike me, like you are wonderful at systems and process. So maybe from a different perspective, how would you encourage someone to approach that question?
That's a really good question, Kimberly. Yeah, if a coach comes to me and says, hey, look, I just want to be a better coach, but not in the coaching skills domain. I want to be, maybe it's professionalism, maybe it's presence, maybe it's something along these lines. I would really recommend to find a few coaches that you are willing to follow, listen to, emulate, and then sponge up as much time as you can with them. Like I am a completely different person. I shouldn't say completely. I am a notably different person after spending a couple days with Marshall, because I hear him talk. I listen to how he thinks. I try to see as much as I can through the lens that he's looking through, which is very, very high definition. And then reinterpret my situations and the events in my life through that lens. And that helps me change and improve as a provider. Because if I could wave a magic wand and suddenly have the same quality set as Marshall Goldsmith, I'm probably going to be in a better position. So I'm going to have myself 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people that I'll listen to, watch, follow consistently, and say, I want to be some amalgamation of those people. Now, here's the flip side that's not so pretty. I would also say find at least 2 coaches that you absolutely disagree with from a philosophical standpoint or from a coaching standpoint, or that you just genuinely don't enjoy listening to. Listen to them. Spend equal time with them to understand what you don't like about them, what you dislike about their message, what you disagree with, because that will fortify and reinforce what you do agree with without pigeonholing or, let's say, getting too myopic on the topics or areas that you enjoy consuming. If you can force yourself into abrasion, if you can force yourself into justifying why you disagree and actively think about it while you're listening, I think that you're going to have some pretty profound effects that will make you a more robust service provider. You know, speaking of systems, that's a system. It's not a prescription. You know, it's not a quality, but it is a replicable, predictable, and reliable way to consistently improve yourself. That's why stakeholder-centered coaching makes so much sense to me. I'm not certified in anything else. I have no affiliation with any other coaching bodies. Neither does Frank, neither did Chris, neither does Marshall. The system is what gets it done. And all of the qualities that you bring as a coach are kind of the real attractors outside of the process. So I think that's the advice I would give to that type of coach.
Yeah, I think they will find that very useful.
Ooh.
You made me think of Mike McCartney, right? Because he uses this phrase, which makes sense to me. Iron sharpens iron.
There you go.
Right? It's that willingness that you spoke about to put yourself in contact with people who challenge you for the better.
Yeah, it's Dr. Jonathan Haidt out of NYU, teaches business ethics, has a wonder. I mean, I could listen to the gentleman speak all day long. I really enjoy his approach to academia and what he shares, the way he conducts and presents research. One of the things he talks a lot about is the danger of spending time with people who share your worldview, with whom you agree, and not getting enough of that abrasion. And what happens is you get really, really, let's say, a very narrow tower of expertise that's unchallenged. It's untested, but it's very strongly held beliefs. And he talks about how this is occurring on university campuses. I definitely recommend checking it out. But that's what you'll see happen with coaches is they'll pick one or two people, and that's all that they'll follow. If you can get that abrasion, then you will not only learn more, you'll widen your field of vision, but everything will also come into higher definition. Many things will come into higher definition at the same time. So iron.
That sounds great. And that's Dr. Jonathan Haidt, you said, out of NYU?
Haidt, yes. Okay. Yeah, he's got some fascinating perspectives. It's what's happening in university, and a lot of it he connects to. I'd say check it out. No spoilers. The perspectives that he brings and the way that he debates topics also is just peak professionalism, untethered to his ideas. You know, here's the data. Here's how I interpret it. What's your thought? Definitely encourage coaches to do the same. And also look outside of leadership coaching. Look at sports coaching. Look at parent coaching. Look at what psychologists are doing and what you can learn from them. Look at what I will follow a lot of fitness coaches, and I pick up skills from them, such as something that had a pretty big impact on me was a trainer from a group called NC Fit. They said, as a coach, a big mistake they see in the fitness industry is coaching someone to perform a movement without showing and demonstrating the full movement. So they'll start off by saying, okay, we're gonna do a squat. And instead of saying, here's what we're going to work towards, now let's break it down, they start right into the breakdown phase. Well, when we look at something like stakeholder enrollment, I'll see some of our coaches start by saying, okay, let's take this minute by minute and figure out what we want this to look like, instead of saying, let me just show you a good stakeholder enrollment and then we'll break it down. So by widening this field of view, you also could conceivably pick up new techniques, as I have. Yeah, that's how I'd respond.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Yes, there are many approaches, and I think in life and in coaching, having a very full toolbox is important. So
yes,
you want the right tool for the right moment, and that requires, doing some digging and building a toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. And from the fitness world too, that's, very, the results are really visible in a way that is very different from the conceptual kind of leadership realm.
Well, I'll queue up a question and then we'll circle back to this, but I want you to give you a few seconds to think about it. In Stakeholder Center Coaching, we have a prescriptive list of do's and don'ts that we give to our leaders. Things like when you pick stakeholders, don't select your fan group. Make sure that you're selecting the right people, and do things like, be genuine when you're enacting behavioral change. Don't feel like it's being a phony. Trust the process and what you're doing, that it will be recognized so long as you follow up with it. So my question for you would be, if we made the same thing for coaches, what are some of the do's and don'ts that you would prescribe for coaches who are trying to find their footing in the industry? So think on that question, because we are nearing the top of our time together, and I want to give those of you at home a chance to join the conversation. So if there's a question you'd like to ask as a coach, if there's a person you'd like to be interviewed, drop us a line, podcast@mgscc.net. That's also true for your music recommendations, your mood playlists, or if you can find some style of music or genre or instrumentation that will make Kimberly and I say, oh my gosh, I've never heard something like this before. I'll give you a shout out on LinkedIn. Send it to us, podcast@mgscc.net. If you're interested in learning more about our training programs, go to mgscc.net/sample course to get an instant access to the course Foundations of Stakeholder Center Coaching, where you can learn the founding principles of our coaching methodology at no cost to you. So, Kimberly, tell us about a few do's and don'ts that might be on the list.
Okay. Do be honest, right? Represent yourself accurately. Do be positive. Learn to catch yourself when you're going down a path that's not working and do something different. Do work to establish routines and hold yourself accountable to them. Do start small. We talked a little bit about this, Brandon, and it reminds me of BJ Fogg, who's a professor at Stanford in their persuasive technology lab. Fascinating work and research he does, but one of his phrases that sticks in my mind is, make it stupidly easy and build, really do something and build success on success. And I always find that encouraging. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't allow yourself to stay stuck in a rut, right? Find a way to get out. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And don't be afraid to say you don't know. Building on what you said about finding coaches to follow and learn from, my best learning has come from saying, I don't know, or I know that I'm not doing this effectively. What am I missing? And that takes a lot of vulnerability, but the risk is always, always worth it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kimberly, this has been wonderful to have you. Before we say goodbye to our listeners, could you tell us, how could someone find you? How can they follow your story or get in touch with you?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn, Kimberly Gonsalves. My company is Leadership State, and you could reach me at Kimberly@leadershipstate.com.
Perfect. And we could also go to leadershipstate.com as your website, correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, we will include all of that in the show notes. My guest, Kimberly Gonsalves. Thank you, Kimberly, for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. You can find her on LinkedIn, and we'll include this in the show notes. This has been a Stakeholder Center Coaching production where we believe everyone deserves a stakeholder-centered leader. Join us next week for another episode of Conversations with Coaches.